Hello and welcome back to Joan of the Arc Members. We're going to take a look at why scorn has relented. Human nature is the same everywhere. It defies success. It has nothing but scorn for defeat. The village considered that Joan had disgraced it with a grotesque performance and its ridiculous failure. So all the tongues were busy with the matter. And as bilious and bitter as they were busy, insomuch that, if the tongues had been teeth, she would not have survived her prosecutions. Those persons who did not scold did what was worse and harder to bear, for they ridiculed her and mocked at her. They ceased neither day nor night from their witticisms and jeerings and laughter. Haumette and little Mengite and I stood by her, but the storm was too strong for her other friends. They avoided her, being ashamed to be seen with her because she was so unpopular and because of the sting of the taunts that assailed them on her account. She shed tears in secret, but none in public. In public she carried herself with serenity and showed no distress, nor any resentment, conduct which should have softened the feeling against her, but it did not. Her father was so incensed that he could not talk in measured terms about her wild project of going to the wars like a man. He had dreamed of her doing such a thing some time before. Now he remembered that dream with apprehension and anger, and said that, rather than see her unsex herself and go away with armies, he would require her brothers to drown her, and that if they should refuse, he would do it with his own hands. But none of these things shook her purpose in the least. Her parents kept a strict watch upon her to keep her from leaving the village. But she said her time was not yet, that when the time to go was come, she would know it, and then the keepers would watch in vain. The summer wasted along, and when it was seen that her purpose continued steadfast, the parents were glad of the chance which finally offered itself for bringing her projects to an end through marriage. The paladin had the effrontery to pretend that she had engaged herself to him several years before, and now he claimed a ratification of the engagement. She said his statement was not true, and refused to marry him. She was cited to appear before the ecclesiastical court of Towel to answer for her perversity. When she declined to have counsel, and elected to conduct her case herself, her parents and all her ill-wishers rejoiced, and looked upon her as already defeated, and that was natural enough. For who would expect that an ignorant peasant girl of 16 would be otherwise than frightened and tongue-tied when standing for the first time in the presence of the practised doctors of the law, and surrounded by cold solemnities of court? Yet all these people were mistaken. They flocked to Tal to see and enjoy this fright and embarrassment and defeat, and they had their trouble for their pains. She was modest, tranquil, and quite at her ease. She called no witnesses, saying she would not content herself only with examining and not others. The witnesses for the prosecution would not do. When they had testified, she rose and reviewed their testimony in a few words, pronounced it vague, confused, and of no force. Then she placed the paladin again on the stand and began to search him. His previous testimony went rag by rag to ruin under her ingenious hands, until at last he stood bare, so to speak. He that had come so richly, clothed in fraud and falsehood. His counsel began an argument, but the court declined to hear it, and threw out the case, adding a few words of grave compliment for Joan, referring to her as this marvellous child. After this victory with a high praise, from so imposing a source added, the fickle village turned again, and gave Jo countenance, compliment, and peace. Her mother took her back to her heart, and even her father relented and said he was proud of her, but the time hung heavy on her hands. And nevertheless, for the siege of Orleans was begun. The clouds lowered darker and darker over France, and still her voices said, "Wait." and gave them no direct commands. The winter set in and wore tediously along, but at last there was a change. Bear in mind she was 16 and they were trying to marry her off. That it just blows my mind. And any other daughter would have just complied and done it. She did not. She went to court and stood for herself and didn't do it. The 5th of January, 1429, Joan came to me with her uncle Laxart and said, "The time has come. My voices are not vague now, but clear, and they have told me what to do. In 2 months I shall be with the Dauphin. Her spirits were high, and a bearing martial. I caught the infection and felt a great impulse stirring in me that was like what one feels when he hears the roll of drums and the tramp of marching men." "I believe it," I said. "I also believe it," said Laxart. "If she has told me before that she was commanded of God to rescue France, I should not have believed. I should have let her seek the governor by her own ways and held myself clear of meddling in the matter, not doubting she was mad. But I have seen her stand before those nobles and mighty men unafraid, and say her say, and she has not been able to do that, but by the help of God. That I know. Therefore, with all humbleness, I am at her command, to do with me as she will." "My uncle's very good to me," Joan said. "I sent and asked him to come and persuade my mother to let him take me home with him, to tend his wife, who is not well. It's arranged, and we go at dawn tomorrow. From his house I shall go soon to Vaucouleurs, and wait and strive until my prayer is granted." "Who were the 2 cavaliers who sat to your left at the governor's table that day?" "One was Sieur Jean de Novelport de Metz, and the other Sieur Bertrand de Poulengy. Good metal both. I marked them for men of mine. What is it I see in your face? Doubt?" I was teaching myself to speak the truth to her, but trimming it or polishing it, so I said, "They considered you out of your head, and said so. If it's true, they pitied you for being in such misfortune, but still held you to be mad." This did not seem to trouble her in any way or wound her. She only said, "The wise change their minds when they perceive that they have been in error. These will. They will march with me. I shall see them presently. You seem to doubt again. Do you doubt?" "No, not now. I was remembering that it was a year ago, and that they did not belong here, but only chanced to stop a day on their journey. They will come again. But as to matters now in hand, I came to leave you with some instructions. You will follow me in a few days. Order your affairs, for you will be absent long." "Will Jean and Pierre go with me?" "No. They would refuse me now, but presently they will come, and with them they will bring my parents' blessing, and likewise their consent that I take up my mission. I shall be stronger then, stronger for that. For lack of it, I am weak now." She paused a little while, and the tears gathered in her eyes. Then she went on. "I would say a good-bye to little Manjit. Bring her outside the village at dawn. She must go with me a little of the way. And Homet." She broke down and began to cry, saying, "No, oh no, she is too dear to me. I could not bear it, knowing I should never look upon her face again." Next morning I brought the Manjit, and we walked along the road in the cold dawn, till the village was far behind. Then the 2 girls said their good-byes, clinging about each other's necks, and pouring out their grief in loving words and tears, a pitiful sight to see. And Joan took one long look upon the distant village, and the fairy tree and the oak forest, the flowery plain and the river, as if she was trying to print these scenes on her memory, so that they would abide there always, and not fade. For she knew she would not see them any more in this life. Then she turned and went from us, sobbing bitterly. It was a birthday of mine. She was 17 years old. And basically what that means is she knew that on this mission She knew how she was going to die. She knew how it was all going to go down. So she knew she would never return home and see those places again. Never see a friend's face. She knew. After a few days, Alaxart took Joan to Vaucouleurs and found lodging and guardianship for her with Catherine Royer, a wheelwright's wife, an honest and good woman. Joan went to mass regularly. She helped do the housework, earning her keep in that way. And if any wished to talk with her about her mission, and many did, she talked freely, making no concealments regarding the matter now. I was soon housed nearby and witnessed the effects which followed. At once the tidings spread about a young girl who come. She was appointed of God to save France. The common people flocked in crowds to look at her and speak with her, and a fair young loveliness won the half of their belief, and a deep earnestness and transparent sincerity won the other. The well-to-do remained away and scoffed, but that is their way. Next, a prophecy of Merlin's, more than 800 years old, was called to mind, which said that in the far future France would be lost by a woman and restored by a woman. France was now, for the first time, lost, and by a woman, Isabella Bavaria. Her base queen, doubtless this fair and pure young girl, was commissioned of heaven to complete the prophecy. This gave the growing interest a new and powerful impulse. The excitement rose higher and higher, and hope and faith along with it. And so, from Vaucouleurs, wave after wave of this inspiring enthusiasm flowed out over the land far and wide, invading all the villages and refreshing and revivifying the perishing children of France. And from these villages came people who wanted to see for themselves, hear for themselves. And they did see, and hear, and believe. They filled the town. They more than filled it. Inns and lodgings were packed, and yet half of the inflow had to go without shelter. Still they came, winter as it was. When a man's soul is starving, what does he care for meat and roof? So he can but get that nobler hunger fed. Day after day, and still day after day, the great tide rose. Domremy was dazed, amazed, stupefied, and said to itself, was this world wonder in our familiar mists all these years, and we too dull to see it? Jean and Pierre went out from the village, stared at and envied like the great unfortunate of earth, and their progress to Vaucouleurs was like a triumph. All the countryside flocking to see and salute the brothers of one with whom angels had spoken face to face, and into whose hands by command of God they had delivered the destinies of France. The brothers brought the parents' blessing and Godspeed to Joan, and their promise to bring it to her in person later, and so, with this accumulating happiness in her heart, and high hope inspired, she went and confronted the governor again. But he was more tractable than he had been before. He refused to send to the king. She was disappointed, but in no degree discouraged. She said, I must still come to you until I get the men-at-arms, for so it is commanded, and I may not disobey. I must go to the Dauphin, though I go on my knees. I and the two brothers were with Joan daily, to see the people that came and hear what they said. And one day, sure enough, the Suagin de Metz came. He talked with her in a petting and playful way, as one talks with children, and said, What are you doing here, my little maid? Will they drive the king out of France? And shall we all turn English? She answered him in a tranquil, serious way. I am come to bid Robert de Baudricourt take or send me to the king, but he does not heed my words. Ah, you have an admirable persistence, truly. A whole year has not turned you from your wish. I saw you when you came before. Joan said, as tranquilly as before, It is not a wish, it is a purpose. He will grant it. I can wait. Ah, perhaps it will not be wise to make too sure of that, my child. These governors are stubborn people. to deal with. In case he shall not grant your praise, he will grant it. He must. It is not a matter of choice. The gentleman's playful mood began to disappear. One could see that by his face. Joan's earnestness was affecting him. It always happened that people who began in jest with her ended by being in earnest. They soon began to perceive depths in her that they had not suspected. And then her manifest sincerity and rock-like steadfast of her convictions were forces which cowed levity, and it could not maintain its self-respect in their presence. The Sieur de Metz was thoughtful for a moment or two, and then he began quite soberly. "It is necessary that you go to the king soon. That is, before mid-Lent, even though I wear away my legs to my knees." She said it with that sort of repressed fieriness, that means so much when a person's heart is in a thing. You could see the response in that nobleman's face. You could see his eyes light up. There was sympathy there. He said most earnestly, "God knows I think you should have the men-at-arms, and that somewhat would come of it. What is it that you would do? What is your hope and purpose?" "To rescue France, and it is appointed that I shall do it, for no one else in the world, neither kings nor dukes, nor any other, can recover the kingdom of France. There is no help but in me." The words had a pleading and pathetic sound, and they touched that good nobleman. I saw it plainly. Joan dropped her voice a little and said, "But indeed, I would rather spin with my poor mother, for this is not my calling, but I must go do it, for it is the Lord's will." "Who is your Lord?" "He is God." Then the Sieur de Metz, following the impressive old feudal fashion, knelt and laid his hand within Joan's, in sign of fealty, and made oath that by God's help he himself would take her to the king. The next day came the Sieur Bertrand de Pougy, and he also pledged his oath and knightly honour to abide with her and follow her wheresoever she might lead. This day too, toward evening, a great rumour went flying abroad through the town, namely that the very governor himself was going to visit the young girl in her humble lodgings. So in the morning the streets and lanes were packed with people waiting to see if this strange thing would indeed happen. And happen it did. The governor rode in state, attended by his guards. The news of it went everywhere and made a great sensation, and modified the scoffings of the people of quality, and raised Joan's credit higher than ever. The governor had made up his mind to one thing. Joan was either a witch or a saint, and he meant to find out which it was. So he brought a priest with him to exorcise the devil that was in her in case there was one there. The priest performed his office, but found no devil. It merely hurt Joan's feelings and offended her piety without need, for he had already confessed her before this, and should have known, if he knew anything, that devils cannot abide the confessional, and utter cries of anguish and the most profane and furious cursings whenever they are confronted with that holy office. The governor went away troubled and full of thought, and not knowing what to do. While he pondered and studied, several days went by. The 14th of February was to come. Then Joan went to the castle and said, "In God's name, Robert de Baudricourt, you are too slow about sending me, and have caused damage thereby. For this day the Dauphin's cause has lost a battle near Orleans, and will suffer yet greater injury if you do not send me to him soon." The governor was perplexed by this speech, and said, "Today, child, today? How can you know what has happened in that region today? It would take 8 or 10 days for word to come. My voices have brought the word to me, and it is true. A battle was lost today, and you are in fault to delay me so." The governor walked the floor a while, talking within himself, but letting a great oath fall outside now and then, and finally he said, "Hark, go in peace, and wait. If it shall turn out as you say, I will give the letter and send you to the king, and not otherwise." Joan said with fervour, Now God be thanked, these waiting days are almost done. In 9 days you will fetch me the letter. Already the people of Vaucouleurs had given her a horse, had armed and equipped her as a soldier. She got no chance to try the horse and see if she could ride it, for her great first duty was to abide at her post and lift up the hopes and spirits of all who would come talk to her, and prepare them to help in the rescue and regeneration of the kingdom. This occupied every waking moment she had, but it was no matter. There was nothing she could not learn, and in the briefest time too. A Ross would find this out in the first hour. Meantime, the brothers and I took the horse in turn and began to learn to ride. And we had teaching in the use of the sword and other arms also. On the 20th, Joan called her small army together, the 2 knights and her 2 brothers, and me, for a private council of war. No, it was not a council. That's not the right name, for she did not consult with us. She merely gave us orders. She mapped out the course and would travel towards the king, and did it like a person perfectly versed in geography. And this itinerary of daily marches was so arranged as to avoid here and there peculiarly dangerous regions by flank movements, which showed that she knew her political geography as intimately as she knew her physical geography, yet she had never had a day's schooling, of course, and was without education. I was astonished, but thought her voices must have taught her. But upon reflection, I saw that this was not so. By her references to what this and that and the other person had told her, I perceived that she had been diligently questioning those crowds of visiting strangers, and that out of them she had patiently dug all this mass of invaluable knowledge. The 2 knights were filled with wonder at her good sense and sagacity. She commanded us to make preparations, travel by night, sleep by day, in concealment, as almost the whole of our long journey would be through the enemy's country. Also, she commanded that we should keep the date of our departure a secret, since she meant to get away unobserved. Otherwise, she should be sent off with grand demonstration, which would advertise us to the enemy, and we should be ambushed and captured somewhere. Finally, she said, nothing remains now, but that I confide to you the date of our departure, so that you may make all needful preparation in time, leaving nothing to be done in haste. And, badly at the last moment, we marched the 23rd at 11 of the clock at night. Then we were dismissed. The 2 knights were startled, yes, and troubled, and Sir Bertrand said, even if the governor shall really finish the letter and the escort, he still may not do it in time to meet the date she has chosen. Then how can she venture to name that date? It is a great risk to select and decide upon the date, if this state of uncertainty is about, I said. Since she's named the 23rd, we may trust her. The voices have told her, I think. We shall do best to obey. We did obey. Joan's parents were notified to come before the 23rd, but prudence forbade that they be told why this limit was named. All day the 23rd she glanced up wistfully whenever new bodies or strangers entered the house, but her parents did not appear. Still, she was not discouraged, but hoped on. But when night fell at last, her hopes perished and the tears came. However, she dashed them away and said, it is to be so, no doubt. No doubt, it was so ordered, I must bear it, and I will. De Metz tried to comfort her by saying, the governor sends no word. It may be that they will come tomorrow, and he got no further, for she interrupted him, saying, to what good end? We start at 11 tonight. And it was so. At 10 the governor came, with his guard and arms, with horses' equipment for me and for the brothers, gave Joan a letter to the king. Then he took off his sword, and belted it about his waist with his own hands, and said, you said true, child, the battle was lost on the day you said, so I've kept my word. Now go, come of it what may. Joan gave him thanks, and he went his own way. The lost battle was the famous disaster that is called, in history, the Battle of Herrings. All the lights in the house were once put out, and a little while after dark, when the streets had become dark, of course, and still, we crept stealthily through them, and out at the western gate, and rode away under whip and spur. And that's that part of Joan of Arc. When we return, it's going to bring about the paladin. Remember the paladin who wanted to marry Joan? And as you are well aware, though she was tested in her own country for being a witch or a saint, it was different when English did that, and it was different as well if you were French but had decided to side with the English. She'd have done it the English way. Whether that's why she ended up being slain the way she was, I don't know. But it's possible that that's the reason. But she wasn't a witch, by the way. I just want to clear that up. I know there's a big stigma all around that, but she wasn't a witch. And if she were a witch, then she were a pretty damn good witch, wasn't she? So, but that, what people are like. They don't understand it. They just want to kill it. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.